Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you all have been looking at that clock, waiting for 3 o'clock to come along, and it is finally here. And so I want to welcome you to the Chamber's Business Beat Speaker Series. I'm Del Esparza. I'm the CEO of Esparza Digital and Advertising. I'm a member of the Chamber's Board of Directors, and I'm the Public Safety Chair for the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us for this virtual event today. This is the first of 5 Business Beat events this year, allowing the business community to hear directly from high-level experts and decision makers on timely and relevant topics. And there is nothing more timely and relevant than what we're going to be talking about today. This is beat number 1. We're talking 2022 election results. Just 2 days ago, voters cast their ballots for governor, legislator seats, congressional races, statewide offices like Attorney General, and our open sheriff's office. Many more as well. So we'll walk through those results and those races and the ballot items with the help of a pair of great political experts, recapping the outcomes and discussing what it really means for us now and what it means for the future of our state. But before we get started, I'd like to recognize some really great companies and organizations who are sponsoring the speaker series. Start off with P&M Resources with President and COO Don Terri. New Mexico Mutual, President and CEO Kelly Mixon. The University of New Mexico and its President Garnett Stokes, including UNM Health Science Center, UNM Health, UNM Comprehensive Cancer Center, UNM Athletics, and UNM Rainforest Innovations. Molina Healthcare, Plan President Carolyn Ingram. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of New Mexico, President Janice Torres. French Funerals and Cremations, President and CEO Tom Antrim. Central New Mexico Community College, President Tracy Hartzler. Albertsons and Market Street, Regional Vice President Travis Cheney. U.S. Bank, Vice President Liz Earls. Fidelity Investments, Vice President and Public Affairs Leanne Kravitz, and Presbyterian with their President and CEO, Dal Maxwell. Thank you to these great sponsors and for their engagement and generosity. We appreciate each and every one of you. So we have a rich and robust agenda here. We'll be covering a lot over the course of the next hour, so let's jump right in. I want to start off by introducing our expert panelists today, and they are respected longtime members of the New Mexico news media. Dan Boyd is the Albuquerque Journal's Capital Bureau Chief, and Chris McKee is the Livestream anchor and producer for KRQE News 13. Dan has been covering state government elections, redistricting, and the legislature for more than 13 years. He's a fixture in the Roundhouse and is widely acclaimed for his knowledge and fair, straightforward reporting. And for the past decade, Chris has been covering politics and government in our state as an investigative reporter, a nightside daily reporter, a multimedia journalist, and now a digital anchor and live stream producer. He also runs New Mexico News podcast for KRQE, in addition to overseeing all online news content. Dan and Chris, we're looking forward to a heck of a ride over the course of the next hour, and thank you for being here. You know, Dan and Chris, as a chamber, we take very seriously our responsibility to work with those in government to tackle the most pressing challenges that we're facing. And we look forward to your analysis of this year's election results and what they mean for us now and what they mean for us in the future. So how this will work, Dan and Chris. Our chamber president and CEO, Terri will kick things off with a brief recap of the election results for governor. And then Terri and I will get your perspective on the race and what to expect from state government moving forward. So with that said, take it away, Terri.
Thank you, Del. Well, we'll talk first about the marquee race of this year's election, the race for governor. As you can see on your screen, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham was reelected with 52% of the vote to Mark Ronchetti's 46%. An extraordinary amount of money was raised by both candidates and outside organizations, especially the Democratic Governors Association, contributed records amounts of advertising in this race, well over 10 million from the DGA alone. It was competitive, Del, But ultimately, as voters tend to do in New Mexico, they awarded the incumbent a second term.
Yeah, well, thanks, Terry. And Dan and Chris, we're going to get your comments. And well, to tee it off, one of the things that we've heard, over the course of the last 6 months, and really feverishly over the course of the last couple of weeks, is the red wave taking place nationally, and how that was going to impact New Mexico as well. The president's approval ratings have been pretty low. Voters are very frustrated with the economy. Many thought that the New Mexico governor's race to be one of those races that tipped to the GOP if Republicans overperformed. Dan, why don't you go first? What were your thoughts on the election and what really happened?
Yeah, I really think we had some different kind of colliding trends in this race. You mentioned kind of the national mood favoring Republicans, given inflation, President Biden's approval ratings, but then also recent history does favor incumbent governors in New Mexico. Michelle Lujan Grisham, with her victory this week, becomes the 4th governor in a row to win re-election. So I think she had that going for her. Mark Ronchetti certainly ran a very spirited campaign. As mentioned, he raised a lot of money. I think national groups thought this race was in play, and they invested a lot of money into the state. I think he really tried to focus on issues like crime and the economy, kind of those kitchen table issues, and kind of, hold the governor accountable in those areas. I think the governor, for her part, was really able to kind of use the abortion ruling this summer by the U.S. Supreme Court as kind of a place that she could be on the offensive a little bit more, and certainly push back pretty hard on her handling of the pandemic, kind of the current trajectory of New Mexico's economy, and things like that.
Good point. Chris, some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting to point out here, Bill, you mentioned the idea of the red wave that was supposed to kind of wash over the U.S. in sort of response to the Biden administration's handling of just the United States at large. We did some polling ahead of this election. KRQE teamed up with Emerson, did some polling, and essentially what we found, Biden's approval rating is stronger here than it is nationally. And the polling, I should say as well, is a little all over the place. There were some polls that showed it was super competitive. I think there was even one poll that had come out that showed Ronchetti had an edge by even maybe a percentage point and a half. But what we saw in the end, right, was about a 6-point spread between the two. Our last poll indicated there was about a 3-point spread between the two. So it was a little bigger than what we had projected. But I do think that, when you wrap up Ronchetti's campaign, we have just published an article about this yesterday on KRQE.com. My colleague Curtis Segar did. He took a look at the unofficial results right now, taking a look at where the voting numbers are for Ronchetti compared to what Trump saw support-wise, and it was nearly identical. And if you are going to win the governor's race in New Mexico, you've got to reach across. You got to, find those more moderate Democratic voters, and you got to win the metro, essentially. As I understand, the metro has about a third of, I think, New Mexico's voting population, and clearly it just, while Ronchetti certainly has that name recognition, he was not able to make that breakthrough to, land enough votes to make this even more competitive. One other interesting note to, I think, look at with the numbers was just, if you look at the results statewide, right, and seeing how many total votes the governor got, and then look at that in sort of the other statewide races, right, about 368,000 votes for the governor. There were candidates on the ballot, Democrats, that did outperform her. Maggie Toulouse-Oliver had 382,000 votes. Joseph Maestas got 398,000 votes. So there were fellow Democrats that actually did better than her in statewide races, outperformed her. So you can tell there is a little bit of difference, right, between the support that the governor saw versus her Democratic colleagues. However, it obviously was not enough to allow Ronchetti to sort of move in there and, win the hearts, if you will, of most of the voters here.
Yeah. You bring up a good point. One of the things that we've heard a lot over the course of the last 2 months, 3 months, and really we've been realizing this and feeling this, for years is how polarized the country is. And Mark Ronchetti mentioned in his concession speech a concern about really there being two New Mexico's forming with very different political views and political agendas. And, Mark won Valencia County by nearly 20 percentage votes. He won Hobbs by 68 percentage points, Alamogordo by more than 30 percentage points. Meanwhile, the governor won Las Cruces by 15 points, Albuquerque, to your point, Chris, by 17 points, and Santa Fe by 50 points. Does it feel as though there's really an urban-rural divide taking place and growing in New Mexico?
Yeah, I would certainly say so. I mean, I know Chris touched on it, but we've seen that in the state house as well, that kind of the rural parts of New Mexico becoming even redder and the urban parts of New Mexico becoming even bluer. And I think when you look at the numbers, I mean, just the population of Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, along with Santa Fe and Las Cruces, I mean, just that makes up such a big segment of the state's population that it makes it tough for Republicans to have a path to victory statewide, unless, like Chris said, you can win over some of those Democrats. And obviously that's proven to be difficult for Mark Ronchetti, for Donald Trump. I mean, for Republicans to kind of have that message that resonates with independents, with conservative and moderate Democrats, and especially when we're seeing, rural parts of the state that feel like Santa Fe doesn't listen to them, but kind of not having the numbers to overcome that population advantage in the urban areas.
And I would say along those lines too, it just feels like everything becomes more nationalized, right? There's always a chance to tie the party to what's happening nationally in advertising. And the more nationalization, I feel, the more divisive it seemingly becomes, and that divide continues to expand. But that's kind of just my perspective, at least.
Just real quick, Del. So how much of a mandate do we expect the governor to claim from these results? And therefore, what issues do you think she'll use her political capital on?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, 52% is a smaller margin that other governors have had in recent history for re-election. And a lot of governors have faced difficulties in their second term, especially dealing with the state Senate, getting a lot of their agenda through. That said, I think Michelle Lujan Grisham is in a pretty enviable position as far as the state budget situation. We haven't yet heard exactly her plans for using some of that, but I think now that she's won re-election, we'll start hearing more of that, certainly in the coming weeks with the session right around the corner. And I think having that amount of money available, I mean, certainly she can have a pretty outsized impact in the second term. And I think that's part of why, there was so much at stake in this year's election, just given that unprecedented revenue situation that New Mexico's in right now.
Well, for sure, she's definitely in a great position too, considering the outcome of the races in the legislature. And so that's probably a good segue into talking about some of the legislative races. Terri, you want to talk to us about that?
Absolutely, Del. As a reminder, only the state house was up for re-election this year. And as you can see on your screen, the current makeup of the state house is heavily tilted in favor of the Democratic Party. Out of 70 total members, 45 are Democrats, compared to just 24 Republicans and 1 independent. As a result of this week's elections, the overall composition isn't going to change hardly at all. There will be 44 Democrats for sure and 24 Republicans for sure, with 2 other races that ended on election night, deadlocked at 50% to 50%. Those will likely have to undergo recounts. One of the 50-50 races is in the Deming area, where Democrat Representative Candy Sweetser trails Republican Jennifer Jones by just 43 votes. The other 50-50 race is on Albuquerque's west side, an open seat where Republican Robert Moss trails Democrat Charlotte Little by about 30 votes. So as it stands now, a Republican victory in one race and a Democrat victory in the other will bring the balance of power to 45 Democrats and 25 Republicans, which is essentially where things stand today. Del?
Wow. So Chris and Deanna, if you're in the House Democratic leadership, you're probably breathing huge sigh of relief this week, right? I mean, just take a look at the slide. I mean, there are 6 House races where the Democratic campaign margin of victory was just 50 to 50, 51 to 49, 52 to 48, including 3 seats in southern New Mexico and 3 seats in Albuquerque. If they had lost those 6 seats, things would look completely different in the House. But where it stands right now, it's the same size majority going forward, right? To Terri's point, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first and then let Chris kind of follow up. I think going into the night, I think even Democrats expected to lose more seats than this. I think this was a year that a lot of people expected, especially in the Albuquerque area, that maybe Republicans could win back some of those seats that they had lost either 2 or 4 years ago. So I think basically, like to Terri's point, keeping a 45-25 is I think Democrats are really happy with that outcome. Like you said, it could have been different, and there's still the 2 races that will apparently go to an automatic recount. But I think that gives them a pretty solid majority to advance their legislative agenda. We'll see that they're holding a caucus meeting this weekend to talk about leadership changes. So that'll be interesting to see who the next House Speaker is. But certainly it would have been much different if you're looking at a 38-32 House or even a 40-30 House as opposed to 45-25, where they're going to have the ability to get a lot of that agenda through without needing Republicans to necessarily vote along with them.
Yeah, and I think also to Dan's point too, that majority stands, and keep in mind, you're thinking about a couple years ago, one of the last election cycles, when we saw a lot of the, you could say the blue dog Democrats, right, got knocked out. You had, just a lot of changes that happened in the Senate. We think about John Arthur Smith. He certainly was the change that, or I should say, he was always right, talked about as, quote, Dr. No, and sort of stood in the path of even sometimes Democratic agenda. So point is, those changes happened a couple years ago, and the people who made those replacements are pretty much all still there in both the House and the Senate. And it speaks to, I think, the point Dan was making as well, that it puts the governor in a pretty enviable position to continue forward with her agenda. And I do want to note as well, I totally agree. It'll be really interesting to watch who the new House Speaker is. There's been some speculation. Maybe it's Javier Martinez. He's certainly one of the people that seems next in line for a leadership position. Brian Egolf is out. The auto recount thing as well, I think it's important to note. We talked to the Secretary of State here for our upcoming podcast episode here at KRQE, publishes Tuesday. But we talked to the Secretary of State. There's never been a recount that has actually overturned a decision, a win in New Mexico. So you can, if that holds true, you can expect that, where the vote counts now, even if the thin margins that are there, they will maintain. So yeah, I really think it's going to be an interesting legislative session we're going into.
Now, Chris, I think you're absolutely right. All arrows point to Javier Martinez as the next speaker. I mean, he even talks about that role and was doing so a few weeks ago. So it would be shocking if he's not the speaker as we move forward. We have a lot of new faces in the State House yet again. What challenges do you both think are created by having so many new people join the House every year? What effect does that have?
It some degree feels like perhaps there's the wild card factor. While they ran a campaign, there may be an issue that pops up. They say, absolutely not, I'm not going that direction. But the other side of that too is sometimes the new faces are more inclined to side with the party at large because they don't want to rock the boat too much because, re-election happens. And as we've seen in recent years, the Democrats are willing to challenge their own party members in primaries, knocking out again some of the more conservative Democrats that we saw sort of stood in the way of the abortion ban repeal that existed up until the 2021 session, I think it was. So yeah, the fresh faces kind of wild card factor, right? Who's going to stand out and say absolutely not? Who's going to maybe say I'm definitely with the team on this one?
Certainly will be interesting. I think, gosh, we have an hour to talk about a lot of things. I wish we had 4 hours. I'd like to kind of stop the conversation there because it looks like our very first special guest has arrived, and it's Democrat Cynthia Borrego, former Albuquerque City Councilor who won the open house seat on the west side of Albuquerque. Cynthia, welcome and congratulations on your victory.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I was out pulling up signs, so I got here just in time to put a blazer on and look like I was, dressed up.
Well, you look fantastic, and congratulations. I mean, you garnered 52.5% of the vote. Fairly close race. So I'm sure you're happy the campaign's over and you're able to go out there and pull out those signs. Curious, what did you hear as you were talking to voters during the campaign? What do you attribute to your success?
I think that crime is a huge issue still, and it's not just in Albuquerque, it's all over the state. The homeless issue is still a big issue. A lot of questions about mental health. I don't know, we've seen the number of incidents happening around Albuquerque, the Southwest Mesa, and downtown. A lot of people, unfortunately, COVID had a big effect on people's psyches and also their economics. I mean, so those are big issues: crime, homelessness, economics. I mean, how do we get more jobs in New Mexico? But also, how do we get more mental health programs and get a handle on this crime that we've got going on?
Cynthia, it's Terri. Congratulations. It's just going to be wonderful working with you in the state legislature.
Terri, you and I worked together for 35 years.
Yes, we have.
Counting, right?
Yes, we have a very long and fun and rewarding relationship, and I've appreciated working with you. What I appreciate most is your willingness to bring everyone to the table and try to solve problems, not getting too caught up in the partisan sort of elements of any decision. What kinds of issues do you anticipate working with the Republicans on in the upcoming session?
Well, Terri, as you know, in my district, and I can only speak to my district when I was counselor, I worked really well with Republicans, and we worked on, for example, and I'll give you some examples, Paseo del Norte. I mean, Sandra Rue and I were tied at the hip. There's other Republicans that I worked with on issues related to different things in my district. So those are the things I speak to. But I grew up in northern New Mexico, and my family still lives up there, and they're all in business. So I hear a lot of things from not just Albuquerque, but northern New Mexico. And I have a cousin who does business all over the South, and he's a Republican, and he gives me an earful every time I see him about issues that they have down in the South. People were upset at me in the beginning because I took oil and gas money, and that was in the primary. Mostly, I did receive some in the general, but I think we need to stop and think about like oil and gas. Really, I mean, they're funding our education system. So I think we just, we all live in this beautiful state, and it's, some people faulted me for being a moderate Democrat. I'm proud of that. I'm really proud of it. And I think that will help me in the legislature to reach across the aisle and work with people from all walks of life. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to do that. And I think that, Terri, when we worked on the there was an issue where I was trying to bring everyone to the table. What was it, Terry? I forget.
It was paid sick leave.
Paid sick leave. And I was trying to bring the chambers and Olay and everybody to sit at the table and talk about what are the commonalities and what are our differences and what do we agree to disagree on. And I think that being a planner for 30 years, I feel like I know how to build consensus. And so, I heard your conversation earlier about newer legislators, just following the crowd. I'm probably one of the least crowd followers that there is. So I'm not going to say that I'm going to go in there and upset the apple cart, because that's not my goal. My goal is to try to get good legislation passed that makes sense for, us to move forward.
Well, let me just say, just real quickly, Dell, Cynthia, thank you for understanding the challenges the business community has as they operate their businesses day in, day out. You just don't know how big of a idea that is for us to be able to work with you when you understand small business. You appreciate it. So thank you very much. We look forward to doing more good work with you.
I look forward to seeing you guys in Santa Fe. And I am a small business owner, which I have neglected for the last 5-6 months. So I have to get busy also. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Cynthia. Again, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So very excited. Our second guest has joined us now. It's Republican Alan Martinez, who also won an open seat, Rio Rancho's base district 23. Alan, you took a 54% of the vote. Congratulations, and thank you for being here. We really look forward to working with you in Santa Fe. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been working on in your career, and why you decided to jump into our citizen legislature.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity to meet with you. I had a great 25-year career with the Department of Veteran Services. So my entire career was advocacy. I started in 1993 as a file clerk and kind of worked my way up. Served the last 8 years of my career as a deputy secretary, and 16 years I was the policy director. So I have some experience with the legislature and building coalitions. We were very proud of the fact that we built coalitions of Republicans and Democrats in order to get good policy done. So I've always been a policy nut, because I've always felt like good policy, you have good results, and bad policy, you never get the good end of it. I decided to run because I was tired of complaining. And when redistricting happened, we previously lived in Jane Powdrell's district, District 44. And after the redistricting, I decided to jump in. I had never been involved in politics aside from my policy work. So people were, I got phone calls from some Democrats who were shocked that I was a Republican, and got calls from Republicans that were shocked that I was a Republican, which I took as, kind of a badge of honor, because it was policy that I was most interested in. When I showed up to my first county party meeting, everybody kind of looked at me like, who's this guy? But it was very important to me, and important to my state. I got tired of having these conversations of people complaining about, policy on crime and policy on energy, that I decided to quit complaining and try to do something about it. So I've never been involved in the party, simply because I was more interested in passing good policy when it comes to veterans and their families.
Well, Well, I think we speak for I speak for everyone on this. Thank you for putting your name on the ballot. It's not an easy thing to do. We appreciate your service, and we look forward to working with you in the legislature on behalf of the Albuquerque business and our community.
Absolutely, I'm very excited about it. I didn't realize, if somebody had told me how much of a drain on your time and your energy campaigning was, I probably wouldn't have done this. But being involved in small business, when I was a kid, my dad owned a furniture store. And then when I graduated from college, I had a chance to go into partnership with him. So he had a furniture store and I had an appliance store. So being very involved in the idea that if I don't sell this washing machine, I can't pay salaries to my employees. So I'm very aware of the challenges. And one of the things I'm very proud of, with my work with veterans, was the establishment of the Veterans Business Opportunity Centers that helps veterans who want to open a business or expand their business. They now had a place to go that was, directed at their experience. So I've, throughout my adult life, I've had ties to the small business community in one way or another.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to working with you. I love your background, your perspective, and what you just shared. We're a state that's built by small businesses, and selling a washer results in salary for an employee. And so that kind of perspective and looking at things through that lens is going to be very, very helpful. And we look forward to working with you. So I'd like to switch gears now and talk about other statewide offices that were on this year's ballot. Terri?
Well, the governor and lieutenant governor aren't the only statewide officials we elect every 4 years. Voters also had their say on who our next attorney general will be, as well as secretary of state, state auditor, state land commissioner, and state treasurer. So sticking with the general theme of things, Democrats were victorious in all of these races by as wide a margin as 11 percentage points. Incumbents Maggie Toulouse Oliver and Stephanie Garcia Richard were reelected in the Secretary of State and Land Commissioner races, while we have new faces in the other three positions. Raul Torres will leave the DA's office and become the next Attorney General. Laura Montoya will be the next state treasurer, and Joseph Maestas will be the next state auditor. Del?
Well, Dan and Chris, true to form, these races were generally more low profile, with a lot less money raised than what we talked about earlier with the governor's race. Any surprises about these results?
Yeah, I don't think there were a lot of surprises. I think we knew going in that Democrats would probably have the advantage in these races, especially as Terri mentioned, that the two of them are incumbents. Someone like Raul Torres, certainly, even though he wasn't incumbent, has that kind of name recognition from his time as DA in Bernalillo County, and something that I think the Republicans in some of these races struggled to kind of, a little bit more political unknowns. I think someone like Jeremy Gay may be kind of building his name recognition during this campaign, and could be interesting to see what they go on to do. But in a race like this, when you're trying to kind of overcome that Democratic advantage in voter registration statewide, and certainly hard to do that when you maybe don't have quite that name ID as your opponent.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think one of the things that struck me, I think Jeremy Gay is probably a name you'll see more in other races here in the future. One of the things that struck me was even the state auditor's race, the Republicans didn't even run a candidate. I don't know why exactly, but my only guess is that presumably they felt that the writing was on the wall, or that it would be a tough race for whoever entered in, and maybe there was no candidate that was even interested. But when you see that a state office where the party doesn't even run a candidate, it says something. Not a whole lot of surprises here. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. You did see that in the total vote count that many of these candidates actually performed better than the governor did. So an indication there that you know, at least some voters going into the ballot box are not just doing that straight ticket sort of thing. They are considering and thinking about who they are voting for, even if, you know, a slate of Democrats ends up running. Yeah, name recognition certainly stood out to me in these races, that the incumbents did not really have a challenge. And even Raul Torres, who's faced a lot of criticism over the handling of crime in Bernalillo County, he did very well against Jeremy Gay there.
You know, Chris and Dan, let's talk about that ticket splitters comment for just a minute. It seems to me the one thing you can see from these results is that it seems to me, don't have a lot of ticket splitters in New Mexico anymore. The gap between these candidates and the top of the ticket just wasn't that significant. It definitely feels as though one impact of increasing polarization in America is that there are fewer and fewer competitive races across the country and at all levels, which we know to be true. That's just going to benefit the Democrats here, right? Or do you disagree with that? Chris, why don't you take that first?
It is a good question, and one I find hard to answer. I do think, though, that you are correct. Like, not a lot of ticket splitters here in this state. Polarization certainly feels like it's having an impact. I remember we talked to Gabe Sanchez after the primary here at KRQE. We did it for another episode of our podcast. Another plug there. But essentially, one of the things that he said was, you know, or this was actually, I'm sorry, after the mayoral election, and it was specific to one of the debates where Tim Keller and Manny Gonzalez had some harsh words for each other over things we won't get into here. But essentially, Gabe's take on it was that, you know, who wants to run for office anymore? And I think Dell even mentioned this. Thanks for putting your name on the ballot, because it is difficult. It is really difficult to go out there and sometimes weather that criticism. Somebody who's never run for office myself, has just been in news, I can only imagine just some of the criticism that candidates are having to deal with in their personal and professional lives out there. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel like anytime soon that we're going to get back to these, you know, competitive races. It really does feel it's either one party takes all, and not so much, you know, back to prior to my day, even being here. I've only been here for 10 years, but when people talked about, you know, in the US Senate, one Democrat, one Republican, were in power for a long time. Dan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I think it is different than what we've seen historically. I mean, land commissioner is one office that we've seen it go back and forth. A lot of Republicans, even in the last 10, 20 years, elected as land commissioner. I do think, you know, Republicans, it's a little bit of a catch-22. They maybe don't have the name recognition because they don't have any statewide elected officials right now. And I think so for them to try to get candidates who maybe have that name recognition and who might be able to, you know, appeal to some moderate or conservative Democrats. But it's tough to do that when Democrats are sweeping these races and kind of building that bench, so to speak.
Boy, I'll tell you, gone are the days, Dell, Esparza, you'll remember this, when Heather Wilson used to get elected into Congress and Steve Schiff used to get elected into Congress. And they got there because they had Dems cross over and vote for them. I think those days are gone. For now.
Well, speaking of the top of the ticket, do you want to move on to the congressional races, Terri?
Sure, you bet. Well, before this year's election, the map of our congressional districts was pretty dramatically redrawn, adding quite a bit of drama and intrigue. You can see what the maps looked like before and after redistricting on your screen. And though it was razor thin in the 2nd Congressional District, incumbent Republican Yvette Harrell was defeated. And we now have an entirely Democratic congressional delegation. Dell?
Yeah, thank you, Terri. You take a look at the map, and it seems as though much of the campaign action, to your point, Terri, was in the 2nd Congressional District. which was heavily targeted by the Democrats as a pickup opportunity following a redistricting effort that took place, removed some conservative East Side voters from the district, added the Democratic South Valley to the district, hence a new Democrat in that seat. Thoughts on the movement? Thoughts on what took place, Chris and Dan?
Well, I'd be curious to hear Chris's thoughts too. I think one thing with the CD2 race, it seemed like it got started late, maybe because of the redistricting with the new maps. I mean, we didn't hear the same kind of spending as in the governor's race, for example. But in that last month or so, I think with President Biden coming to New Mexico and speaking in the newly drawn second congressional district, I think that the question would be, how would it affect this race, having the South Valley, parts of Albuquerque in that district, and would that be enough to put somebody like Gabe Vasquez over the top? And we found out it would. So I haven't crunched all the numbers yet, but I think having some of those areas in that district, and I think some of the tribal voters as well, largely favoring Gabe Vasquez, I think that kind of helped push him over the top. We'll see. I mean, this isn't a resolved issue. There's still a lingering lawsuit about the newly drawn districts that the Supreme Court's going to have a hearing on in January. So it might not be a done deal yet, but if this map holds, I think it shows that it's going to be difficult for Republicans, for the next decade to try to win in these districts.
Yeah, I think, I was screaming about this on election night with Gabe Sanchez, our political analyst we had in here. Is like, man, redistricting matters. People really need to pay attention to this stuff because when you redraw political boundaries, it really can amp up the competition. And obviously that happened here in District 2. Now, I do think, to Dan's point, crunching the numbers, it'd be interesting to see, is there a way to tell? I think there would be, but, had the old boundaries stuck around, would Harrell have had less of a competition? That would be an interesting kind of breakdown to see in this case, because remember, she did lose the seat in 2018 to an energized pool of Democratic voters, to Xochitl Torres Small. So it was possible in some sense that Democrats could win in the old maps too. But obviously, I do think that redistricting, when you rope in the West Side, the South Valley, it obviously is going to have a major impact on just the pool of voters, and voter registration is far more even now than it was in the old boundaries. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that court challenge pops up. January,
that's
Supreme Court.
Chris, that's a very good reminder for us about Representative Small some time ago. That's a good reminder. So I'm not sure this is fair to say or not, but I'm feeling it a bit. It appears with the loss of Yvette Harrell in southern New Mexico, it appears the Republicans have really lost any foothold in New Mexico government. Is that fair to say, or is that an overstatement?
No, I think that's pretty fair to say. Dan, you were just about to say something here too. But I mean, look at all the statewide races. They're all Democrats. The entire congressional delegation is Democrats. The state house is controlled by Democrats. It speaks to, there's going to have to probably be some discussion about how the party markets itself to some degree and what candidates they run. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I was also going to add, we'll see what happens still nationally, but it looks like Republicans will control the U.S. House, which means that all three members of New Mexico's delegation will be in the minority. So that will be, an interesting dynamic to watch. Certainly when it comes to Congress, seniority matters too. And we have as far as seniority goes, not a really experienced delegation. Certainly they'd be getting up there if they're able to kind of hold on to these seats. But, with those national trends and control going back and forth, I mean, if Republicans control the House and we have an all Democratic delegation, that could be something to watch.
I think one real quick point, who's going to run in 2024? Which party does that energize? We know that President Trump is widely expected to declare his candidacy possibly next week. So does that energize Democrats in 2024? And does that therefore mean anything different for the House seats?
Yeah. Good points. Let's move on to the final race that we'll talk about today, and that's the sheriff race. Terri?
Thank you, Dale. So given the Chamber's big focus on crime and public safety, we think it's important to remind everyone that as of January 1, there will be a new sheriff in town. Manny Gonzalez was prevented by law from running again, and the race to replace him pitted two law enforcement veterans against one another, Democrat John Allen and Republican Paul Pacheco. In heavily Democratic Bernalillo County, Allen earned a very big win by 12 percentage points. Del?
You know, it's I'm curious, Terri, your perspective, Dan and Chris, out of the gates, and how things may change as we move from Sheriff Manny Gonzalez, who very publicly didn't often get along with APD and ran against Mayor Tim Keller. Thoughts on what might happen, the outcome, how he might work with APD? John Allen might work with APD, might work with the mayor.
Yeah, I think I listened to an interview one of our reporters here, George Gonzalez, did with John Allen on election night when he had the lead. He mentioned things like people are concerned about crime in the county, so that's what I ran for. He said he wanted to do some more collaboration in behavioral health, working with APD and surrounding counties. So I think that hearing that from the outset is interesting. And, I guess we'll just have to see if it comes true. But, Del, obviously, to your point, he had a very, Manny Gonzalez, as the leader of the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, particularly towards the end of his tenure, had a very prickly relationship, you could say, with Albuquerque police. There wasn't a whole lot of communication happening there, according to statements that the mayor's office sort of put forward. So, yeah, I think it is going to be, if anything, it's a fresh start, to see how they may partner with each other. But, leadership is one thing. And I think it's also important to point out a lot of the guys that are doing the work on the street, they do work together. They don't have to maybe, do all the political wrangling that happens, when they're working patrol, if you will. So there's always some level of collaboration, but politically, it already seems as if, a fresh start, maybe that means something different. Yeah.
Dan,
Yeah.
any thoughts?
Yeah, and I would just add, and full disclosure, I cover, state government and the legislature more than kind of county level, but I think it is interesting that, that there's pretty broad acknowledgement that the crime is an issue, that more maybe needs to be done in that area, especially when it comes to Albuquerque. But yet we've seen, Mayor Keller last year, Democrat, and a Democrat winning in this race. So there's that acknowledgement of crime, but voters don't seem to think that only Republicans can solve it. So I think that maybe goes to what we were talking about before as well, just kind of the political dynamics currently in Bernalillo County and Albuquerque, but kind of not necessarily rejecting the status quo, at least when it comes to party labels.
Yeah. Well, good points. Timely conversation, given that our third and final special guest is here, and it's our sheriff-elect. So first of all, John, congratulations on the victory.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah. Just as a chamber, I mean, we are very, very policy focused, and on crime in particular. We really look forward to working with you. Can you talk a little bit about your background? Give us a sense of what your plans are, some of your first steps, and how you're going to address some of the violence that's taken place in our city, property theft that's taken place in our community?
No, absolutely. Again, John Allen, thank you so much for having me. Long experience in law enforcement since 1997. I left the Sheriff's Department and retired in 2020, but didn't only semi-retired. I teach at the CNM Law Enforcement Academy. So still teaching our APD cadets and so many other departments from around the state, making sure that we're getting our people power out there so we have officers hitting the street. So some of the plans, what I was just saying, was trying to be proactive. We have to, and I know we have retention and recruiting issues, but it's law enforcement 101 and making sure that there's actually a presence and actually cutting down on response times. And it's very important to me. I actually just got off the phone with a business owner who was just had an armed robbery and a gun in his face on Tuesday, and he's having a difficult time getting in charge of the Albuquerque Police Department. And I believe that's something the Sheriff's Department can help fill in and assist with the collaboration that we so need in this county. The violent crime and homicides are up, and I'm afraid to say I really don't think we're at our peak. So we have to have outside thinking and a focal point on not only just collaboration, but a proactive plan on how to attack property crimes, which is the gateway to violent crimes. I've been telling people for a long time, so many issues, but we all need to communicate together to solve all of these.
Boy, that's true. And congratulations to you, John. Talk to us a little about officer recruitment. Any idea in the world how we can solve that problem? We have been working at it as a city and state for a long, long time.
You know, thinking outside of the box. So one of the plans, I had two plans, and I remember a while ago, the Sheriff's Department, we had a line to the 377th from the Air Force. So I really believe there's a lot of people coming out of the military that want to further serve their community, and they want to do public service, and they're invested in the community that they live. I think that will help a little bit. At the same time, recruiting is very difficult. A lot of people don't want to do this job. The pay scale for, I know the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department, we're not really competing to where we need to be. So that's very important. But retention is huge. And that's with morale. The deputies at the Sheriff's Department, I just got off the phone with one an hour ago, and that is the 8th one in the last 12 hours, that they're tired, they're discouraged, their morale is low, they don't know if they even want to do this job. So those are the issues we're seeing. And I believe leadership and giving them the tools and resources will help negate some of those negative effects that we have.
Well, we certainly wish you the best of luck, and we'll be working with you very closely. We have a little bit more time here to ask you one more question. So what will your first step be with APD? Will you call the chief and have a cup of coffee, or how does that start?
How it starts is, I didn't want to say it during the campaign. It already did. I had lunch with the chief 2 weeks ago, because I thought that if I win or if I don't, I need to hit the ground running. I can't wait. Everyone wants to speak to me on January 1st. I said, no, November 9th, we need to start. So I spoke to the chief. We came up with some plans. And we're going to make sure that criminals honestly know that we're working together, and to watch out, because we're going to really make a dent in this. That's for one. And second, for the community to understand that we will be working together. That's something I've been talking about during the campaign, but for years. That shouldn't even actually be a conversation, honestly. But to make sure we're working on it together, because we know in the metro area and in the unincorporated area, the needs are different. But as we're seeing in the unincorporated area, which is unprecedented, I haven't seen this since 2005 or 2006, our homicide rate is skyrocketing. So there's a lot of issues that we need to deal with, and really dig into the criminal nexus here in Albuquerque, which is empowered, but also work with our federal entities. So a lot of working parts in motion.
Well, we'll be reaching out to you very soon. You know, crime is, you know this, crime is one of our big issues that we work on as a chamber. We've said that a couple of times. So we'll be reaching out to you to get you before our board, and more importantly, to work day in, day out with you. So thank you so much, and congratulations again.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, John. We know that you took time out of your day and you're driving, so please be careful, and we look forward to working with you.
Definitely have a great day.
You too. So we have just one item left on our docket, and that's a constitutional amendment that, after years and years of attempts from certain legislatures, finally made the ballot and passed with flying colors. Terri, I know this is something that you and I have been working on and talking about for years. And so some background information on this?
You bet. That's right, Del. It's a constitutional amendment allowing the state to pull a few $100 million more out of the land grant permanent fund each year to spend on early childhood programs and K-12 public education. It passed with 70% support. Wow. Del, back to you.
Yes, a tremendous amount of support. And, you know, Dan, you've covered this issue for much of the time that you've been with the Journal. There's been a very consistent opposition at the legislature for this year after year by Republicans and more moderate Democrats. But over time, I guess with the defeat of several moderate Democrats in the Senate, the appetite to dip into a very large permanent fund was just too much to resist, regardless of what the surplus looks like. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the defeat of a few those kind of key moderate Democratic senators in the 2020 primary really did pave the way for this. I was intrigued during this year's campaign. There was never any real formal opposition that emerged to this constitutional amendment. Certainly, there was a lot of support and organizing in favor of it. I think it'll be interesting and important for us to kind of scrutinize how this money is put to use, how it's spent. I mean, certainly, given the revenue right now, I mean, it's going to be a lot of money flowing into early childhood. And I think, proponents have said this is an investment in the future. So we'll have to see if it pays off. I mean, I think the risk is that it could mean less money down the road in this permanent fund. But, if it's effective and if it's plugged into programs that work, I think that's the hope, that maybe it can help us break out of some of these kind of cycles of poverty and low education ranks and things like that.
Chris,
Yeah,
any thoughts?
I totally agree with Dan. It is going to be, the big question is, how does it get spent, and who, makes that plan, and how effective does it come together? One of the things that we hear from some lawmakers is that, New Mexico has money. New Mexico is often discussed as a poor state, but obviously there are oil and gas revenues that have been at record levels. The state does have money, and the permanent fund obviously has been a large fixture of, at least reserves for a while of some level. How that money gets spent, I think, is the huge question, because think about even just this last legislative session. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham secured a lot of part of her agenda, and lawmakers ended up passing a lot of money for recruitment and retention, right, for police officers. A lot of that money was doled out, but there was a press release that went out maybe just a month and a half ago saying the state's still looking for applicants to spend that money. And I think it speaks to the idea that you can pour a lot of money towards something, but how it gets spent is always the big question. You hope that it's not wasted. You hope there are results for it. Sometimes, though, as proof by this law enforcement recruitment dollars, there's more money than people are even asking for sometimes. So, and even APD has been a fixture of that, right? They're budgeted for so much every year, but they end up spending a lot of money. They don't have enough officers to actually spend all of the money that's budgeted for the amount of officers they have budgeted. So they end up repurposing money in different ways, which Chief Medina has talked about at different news conferences throughout the year, some of the new programs and things that they've begun. So yeah, the big question that now is like, okay, what's the plan to spend it?
Right. Well, and ensuring that there's some accountability with the results being presented accordingly. So we're on the tail end of this. One last question for you, Dan and Chris. Is there anything that we can or should glean from the results of this year's election that would give us a sense of how the next general election will go in 2024, when both the president and the legislature will be up for election?
I'll take a stab at that first. I mean, I think, like Chris mentioned, a lot of it will depend on who the candidates are 2 years from now. For myself, I'm not that excited about thinking about 2024 quite yet, but I know it's always inevitable. We're always on to the next cycle. I think one little thing to look for in this upcoming session, I think there will be a big debate about whether legislators should be paid in New Mexico. That's something that's been kicked around for quite a while. And I think with the results we saw this time, I think that's something that could get some traction. So maybe something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, who is the candidate? I think that at the national level, that's going to be a really big question, because, I think you could even see, I was looking back at the governor's acceptance speech in after Tuesday night's election. She said, this was defeating a political movement fueled by anger and division, defeated Trumpism. We said no to outsiders running the state. It was really, to me, much of that top of that speech really spoke to the national mood. And I think that's going to be a big question is, yeah, who's the candidates coming up for 2024? Because obviously what we did not see was any kind of a big Republican wave, even nationally. There was some seats that flipped or had the potential to flip for Republicans. But yeah, I think that's going to be the big question. Who do Republicans run nationally and where that takes us? But yeah, in between now and then, man, lot to be figured out. There's, the permanent fund we were talking about, record oil and gas revenues continue. So New Mexico's got a lot of big decisions to make, at least in the regular legislative session, which this upcoming one is a longer one, if I'm correct, right? 60 days?
Yeah.
Yes.
60 days.
Yeah.
Well, we have 2 years. A lot can happen in the next 2 years. Think about it, everything that's happened in the last 2 years. So I cannot believe an hour has already went by. And everything that we covered. I want to thank our expert panelists, Dan and Dan Boyd and Chris McKee. Your insight and analysis of this year's election has just been absolutely outstanding. I think I speak for everyone here when I say I thoroughly enjoyed your perspective, your understanding, and on this election and what it means for the state of New Mexico now and what it means for the state of New Mexico in the future. And Terri, always a joy to hear your perspective and to work side by side with you on these.
Thank you, Dal. Likewise.
So in closing, on behalf of the Chamber, we'd like to once again thank our great sponsors for this business beat. Really, if it wasn't for these sponsors, these events wouldn't take place. PNM, New Mexico Mutual, UNM, Molina Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Mexico, French Funeral and Cremations, CNM, Albertsons Market and Market Streets, U.S. Bank, Fidelity Investments, and Presbyterian. I hope everyone enjoyed today's event as much as I did, and I think it's important for local businesses and their employees to understand and engage in the electoral process. Elections are often messy. We talked about that today, and they're very contentious, but they are the way in which we contend for the future of our community. Elections set the course and the directions, and they truly do matter. And just as important, when the dust is settled from the fight, it's incumbent upon all of us as civic leaders to support and work together with those who are elected for the betterment of our city. If my time on this chamber board has shown me anything, it's that the business community has a lot to contribute to the process of addressing the major challenges that we face. We should always take this opportunity to be a part of making our community better. We want to thank everyone for attending today's first installment of the 22-23 Business Beat Speaker Series. Our next event in the series will feature LFC Director David Abbey on December 7th from 3 to 4. Between now and then, however, we hope to see you with our in-persons and 5-day in-person event in just 5 days at our annual meeting. We will have a great panel of energy experts talking about one of the futures of the economy in New Mexico, and that's hydrogen energy. You won't want to miss it, so please RSVP today. That concludes our event for today. Please be safe, stay healthy, and we will see you soon.